The last photographs Nina Hargrove ever sent her husband were taken on a Tuesday morning in August. In one of them, their 4-year-old son Benjamin was laughing at something off camera. In another, their younger boy, Mason, not yet 2, was sitting on the kitchen floor with a dog on either side of him, looking enormously pleased with himself. Nina sent these pictures to her husband, Daniel, while he was at work. She followed them with a short message that said nothing in particular, just the ordinary currency of a marriage going well. Then the messages stopped. Daniel Hargrove was at his desk when the silence began. He assumed Nina had gone to take care of something around the house. He wrote back once, then again. Then he turned back to his work and told himself she was just busy. It was a reasonable assumption. It was the assumption of a man who had no reason to believe anything was wrong. When his phone rang and his younger brother's voice was on the other end, that assumption collapsed. The call was brief and barely coherent. His brother, 16-year-old Tyler, was frantic. He said something about intruders. He said something about the house being broken into. He said that he was going after whoever had done it.
Daniel could not get a clear picture of what had happened, only that something terrible had occurred and that his family was at the center of it. He called emergency services before the call with Tyler even ended. Then he got in his car and drove home as fast as he could. He would arrive to find police vehicles outside his house. He would be stopped at the door. He would have to stand on his own front step and wait while strangers walked through the rooms where his family lived. And then someone would tell him that his wife and both of his sons were dead.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.
To understand what was lost on that Tuesday morning, you need to understand who Nina Hargrove was. She had grown up in the area, graduated from a local college, and married Daniel shortly after. She was a nurse who worked night shifts so that Daniel could focus on building his career, a quiet, practical kind of sacrifice that she made without making anything of it. She was the kind of person who organized things not for recognition, but because she found order satisfying, and because it meant the people around her had one fewer thing to worry about. She had a plan for most things. She also had dreams. She wanted a daughter. She had been talking about it for months, and the people who knew her said she had that particular happiness about her, the happiness of someone who knows exactly what they want and believes they are moving toward it.
Their older son Benjamin had just turned 4. He was the kind of child who exhausted adults in the most affectionate way possible, curious about everything, in motion constantly, the kind of boy who asked questions faster than anyone could answer them. Mason was a few weeks from his 2nd birthday. He had a temperament Nina once described as profoundly self-satisfied, which she absolutely meant as a compliment. Their home was in the small, quiet town of Millhaven in New Hampshire. Low crime, familiar faces, the kind of community where people leave their cars unlocked and know their neighbors by name. People move to towns like Millhaven specifically for the safety, specifically for the sense that nothing truly terrible can reach them there. It is the kind of town that does not know how to absorb a tragedy of this scale. It does not have the infrastructure for it. And when it happened, the wound it left did not close quickly. It has not fully closed yet. Daniel Hargrove had a younger brother named Tyler. Their mother had raised the boys largely on her own, and the raising had not been easy. She struggled with alcohol throughout their childhoods, and the stability that most children take for granted was something Tyler and Daniel had learned to do without. When their mother died, Tyler was 14 years old. Daniel was in his mid-20s, married with one young son and another on the way. He did not hesitate. He did not want his brother placed in the care of strangers. He did not want Tyler to grow up feeling discarded by what remained of his family. He discussed it with Nina. They agreed. Tyler moved into the basement of the Hargrove home and became, officially, Daniel's legal ward. At first, it worked. Or at least, It appeared to work. Tyler helped around the house. He spent time with Benjamin. He was quiet, somewhat withdrawn, but grief and disruption do that to people, especially to a teenager who has never had the kind of foundation that makes stability feel natural. Daniel gave him space. Nina gave him patience. They both believed that consistency and time were what he needed most. They were wrong, but they would not know that for a while. The first signs appeared gradually. Tyler's school performance collapsed, and what was more troubling was that he did not seem to care. He began stealing from the house, small amounts of cash at first, then larger ones. He took the family car on at least one occasion without permission, drove through the night with a group of friends, and returned it the next morning as though nothing unusual had occurred. Daniel filed a police report and then withdrew it before charges were laid. He did not want to make things harder for his brother. He believed in second chances. He believed in patience. He believed the right approach was to stay close and keep trying. But the behavior escalated. The arguments inside the Hargrove home grew louder and more frequent. Tyler began to make threats during the worst of these arguments. Not vague, unfocused anger, but specific statements. In one heated exchange, he told Daniel and Nina that he had hidden a firearm in the garage and planned to use it while they slept. Daniel called the police. Officers arrived and searched the garage thoroughly. They found nothing. Because Tyler had never physically harmed anyone, there was no legal basis to detain him. The officers drove away. The family was left exactly where it had been, except now the temperature inside the house had risen by several degrees. Daniel had a .40 caliber pistol registered in his name, kept in a safe in the master bedroom for home defense. He was careful with it. He kept the bedroom locked, and he asked Nina to do the same, specifically, deliberately because of Tyler. He had locks installed on the bedroom door and on the children's room doors. He was beginning to understand, slowly, the shape of what he was living with. But understanding it and knowing what to do about it were two very different things. The night before the killings, there was another argument. Tyler made another threat. Daniel told him that if it happened again, he would be removed from the house entirely. No one called the police. The family had reached a point where involving law enforcement felt pointless. Nothing had changed the last time, or the time before that. That night, the master bedroom was left unlocked. Whether Nina forgot or whether Tyler found a way in regardless, no one can say with certainty. What is certain is that sometime the following morning, while Daniel was at his desk and Nina was in the house with their 2 young sons and the family dogs, the safe was accessed, the pistol was removed, and 4 shots were fired inside the Hargrove home on a quiet Tuesday morning in August, while the rest of Millhaven went about its day without any idea that something irreversible was happening on that street. When officers arrived at the house and received no answer at the door, they walked the perimeter and looked through the windows. Through the dining room glass, one of them saw 2 figures on the floor in a pool of blood. He called out to his colleagues. They made the decision to force the front door open. Daniel arrived at almost the same moment the door came open. Inside, they found Nina first. She was on the dining room floor. Mason was beside her. Both had been shot in the head. The powder burns on Nina's face told investigators that the gun had been held within half a meter of her when it fired, close enough that there was no possibility it was anything other than deliberate. Mason had been shot through the front of his skull. The bullet had exited behind his left ear. He was not yet 2 years old. A few steps away, near the hallway, Benjamin lay on the floor. He had been shot above his right eyebrow. The position of his body suggested he had been moving, running perhaps, the way 4-year-old boys run, toward a door or toward the back of the house, and had not made it far enough. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. Nothing appeared to be missing. The family dog, which neighbors consistently described as aggressive toward strangers and highly protective of the family, had not bitten anyone, had not barked in any way that the neighbors heard. The scene was not consistent with a home invasion. It was consistent with someone the dog knew, someone who moved through that house with the ease of someone who lived there. Tyler arrived while officers were still processing the scene. He pulled Nina's car into the driveway and walked toward the police with a composure that several officers later described in their reports. He told them there had been intruders. He said he had chased them in the car but had not caught them. He said by the time he came back, it was already too late. He was steady, almost entirely steady, and in a house where 3 people had just been killed, in a situation that had reduced Daniel Hargrove to barely being able to stand, Tyler Hargrove was steady. The investigators noted this, they wrote it down, and they began to look more closely.
The inconsistencies in Tyler's account surfaced almost immediately. He said strangers had broken in, but there was no forced entry anywhere on the property. He said there had been a struggle, but Nina's body showed no defensive wounds, no torn nails, no bruising on her hands, no sign that she had fought back against someone she did not know and did not trust. He said he had chased the intruders in the car, but the gardeners working on a neighboring property that morning had not seen any unfamiliar vehicles. What they had seen was a young man matching Tyler's description running out of the front door of the Hargrove house alone, getting into a car and driving away at speed. No one else, no other vehicles, just Tyler. Surveillance cameras mounted on houses in the neighborhood confirmed this account. There were no unfamiliar cars recorded entering or leaving the street that morning. The only vehicle seen was the one Tyler had been driving. The family's .40 caliber pistol was missing from the broken safe in the master bedroom. Daniel confirmed it. His alibi was airtight. Workplace security footage and multiple colleague statements placed him at his desk throughout the entire morning. He was eliminated as a suspect quickly and completely. When investigators took swabs from Tyler's hands during questioning, the results were unambiguous. Gunshot residue was present on both his palms and the backs of his hands. The same residue was found on the steering wheel of the car he had been driving, in quantities that indicated the person behind that wheel had recently discharged a firearm. Tyler continued to deny everything. He asked for a lawyer. He gave nothing further away.
The search for the murder weapon was guided by geolocation data pulled from Tyler's phone, a phone he had apparently not thought to leave at home when he drove to dispose of the gun. The data led investigators to a wooded area near the Hargrove house. After more than a day of searching, they found the .40 caliber pistol and nearly 20 rounds of ammunition hidden in the undergrowth. Ballistic testing confirmed it was the weapon used in all 3 killings. Fingerprints found on the grip and on the cartridges belonged to 2 people: Daniel Hargrove, the registered owner, and Tyler Hargrove, his 16-year-old brother. The question that investigators and the public kept returning to was the same one: why? Why would a teenager kill his brother's wife and 2 infant nephews in cold blood on a Tuesday morning? Why would someone who had been given a home, a family, a second chance, respond to that with this? The answer came partly from Tyler's diaries, found during the search of his bedroom. The diaries described months of building resentment, not toward any single event, not toward any dramatic betrayal, but toward the ordinary friction of being held accountable, toward Daniel pushing him toward school, toward Nina's diminishing patience, toward the expectation that he would behave with basic decency toward the people who had opened their home to him. The diaries made clear that Tyler had been thinking about this for a long time, that it was not an impulsive act born of a single argument. It was planned, considered, written about in careful detail over a sustained period of time. Friends who were questioned confirmed that Tyler had spoken openly about wanting Daniel's family dead. They said they had heard it enough times that it had stopped alarming them. They had categorized it as dark humor, as the kind of thing troubled teenagers say without meaning. They had been wrong about that.
Daniel cooperated fully with the investigation from beginning to end. He answered every question. He provided every piece of information he had. He told investigators about the car theft, the threats, the arguments, the safe, the guns, and he told them, quietly, that he had not truly believed Tyler was dangerous. He had believed that patience was the right approach,
that family was worth the difficulty, that a boy who had been failed by his circumstances deserved someone who would not give up on him. He had been wrong, and that knowledge, the knowledge that his belief in his brother had cost Nina and Benjamin and Mason everything, was something Daniel Hargrove would carry for the rest of his life without ever being able to set it down. Because Tyler was 16 at the time of the killings, the question of how to prosecute him became contentious and drawn out. His defense attorney argued that Tyler's childhood, the alcoholic mother, the instability, the absence of consistent care, the loss, had produced a level of psychological damage that should mitigate his responsibility. Psychiatric evaluations were ordered. The results did not support the defense's position. Tyler had no documented history of mental illness. He had never sought treatment of any kind. The evaluating experts found him fully aware of what he had done and fully capable of understanding its consequences. The attorney also attempted, briefly, to redirect suspicion toward Daniel, suggesting that a man who stood to benefit from his family's deaths deserved closer scrutiny. No life insurance policy was found that could have provided even a marginal financial motive. The argument collapsed under the weight of Daniel's verified alibi and was abandoned. Several weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Tyler pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. The evidence tampering charge was dropped as part of the arrangement. His attorney argued in mitigation that Tyler had driven to the woods intending to take his own life after the killings and had changed his mind at the last moment. Tyler himself, when asked directly why he had done what he did, offered no specific answer. He said only that he had loved the family.
The judge sentenced him as an adult, 60 years in prison. Eligibility for parole when Tyler is in his late 60s. The community around the case did not accept this quietly. There was sustained public pressure to have the possibility of parole removed entirely. Daniel Hargrove supported that effort and has continued to support it. He knows his brother may one day walk out of a prison and into a world that has moved on. He says that thought is with him constantly. There is something that stays with you long after a case like this one. Not just the violence, though that is hard enough to sit with. What stays is the sequence of moments where something might have changed. The police report that was filed and then withdrawn. The threat that was heard so many times it stopped sounding like a threat. The bedroom door that was left unlocked on a Tuesday morning when it should have been locked. The dog that did not bark. Nina Hargrove sent photographs to her husband on the last morning of her life. Benjamin was laughing at something outside the frame. Mason was sitting with the dogs, looking pleased with himself. They were alive and noisy and completely unaware that anything in the world was wrong. Daniel still has those photographs.
This is not a story with a clean ending. The boy who did this is in a prison cell. The man who lost everything is still living inside the loss. And the 2 little boys in those Tuesday morning photographs, Benjamin, who was running when he was killed, and Mason, who was not yet 2 years old, they existed in this world for only a short time. But they existed fully. They existed loudly. They existed with the particular and unrepeatable joy that belongs only to very small children who have no reason yet to be afraid of anything. That is worth saying out loud. They were here, they mattered, and nothing that happened to them was inevitable.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.
On a cold morning in November 1995, a garbage collector working along a remote road on the outskirts of Los Angeles reached into a dumpster and pulled out a handful of photographs. He was not looking for anything in particular. He was doing his route, the same route he did every week, moving through the same streets in the same order, thinking about nothing especially significant. But the photographs caught his attention. They showed a young woman, attractive, professionally lit, the kind of images that suggested someone had paid money to have them taken. He looked at them for a moment, then he kept 4 of them and put them in his truck and continued his route. He had no idea what he was holding. He had no idea that the woman in those photographs had been missing for 4 days, that her mother had not slept properly since the morning her daughter had called to say she was rushing off to a photo shoot and would call back later, that investigators were working through a list of contacts and ex-boyfriends and business associates and coming empty at every turn, that a family was sitting in a house waiting for a phone that was not going to ring. He had no idea that those photographs in his truck were about to become the thread that unraveled everything. Her name was Linda Sobek. She was born in Los Angeles in 1968, the second child of Robert and Elaine Sobek. She grew up in a house where values were taken seriously and hard work was expected, and she absorbed both of those things early. She was shy as a young child, close to her family, particularly to her mother and to her older brother Steve, who became one of her closest friends from childhood all the way through adulthood.
When Linda started high school, something shifted in her. The shyness did not disappear entirely, but it receded, replaced by a growing confidence that surprised even the people who had known her longest. Her mother noticed it first. She noticed the way Linda carried herself, the way a room seemed to respond to her presence, and she suggested that Linda explore modeling. After some hesitation, Linda enrolled with a local agency. She discovered quickly that she liked it. What she lacked in formal training, she made up for in discipline and ambition, 2 qualities she had in abundance. She began doing small photo shoots, building her portfolio, learning the industry from the ground up. She was also a cheerleader at school. After graduating in 1986, she committed herself fully to modeling, and despite the fact that her height was considered a disadvantage in certain areas of the industry, she found consistent work, catalog shoots, commercial campaigns, magazine features. She built relationships. She showed up prepared. She did not wait for opportunities to arrive. She went looking for them.
At 21, she auditioned to become a cheerleader for a professional American football team. She was selected from thousands of applicants. Her family celebrated. Her brother Steve was particularly proud. She was named Cheerleader of the Year, which opened doors she had been working toward for years, connections in the entertainment world, introductions to people in both sports and film, a level of visibility that her modeling career had not yet given her. After leaving the squad, the bookings accelerated, up to 3 photo shoots a day at her peak. She moved out of her parents' house and into a home she shared with 3 other women who were also building their careers. She stayed close to her family despite the pace of her life. She called her mother regularly. She came home often. She talked about the future with the kind of specificity that suggested she had thought carefully about it. She wanted to transition into acting. She had begun auditioning for television roles. She had a plan, and she was working it methodically. In early October 1995, at an industry event in Las Vegas, Linda handed her business card to several photographers. A month later, she received an invitation to a photo shoot for a car magazine. The photographer was a man named Charles Rathbone, well known in his field, described by colleagues as professional and skilled, though some found him difficult to work with under pressure. Linda accepted the booking. It was work, and she took work seriously.
That booking would be the last professional engagement of her life. November 16, 1995 began the way Linda's best days usually began, with momentum. She had an audition scheduled that afternoon for a popular television program. She was prepared for it. She was in good spirits. Then, early that morning, her phone rang with an unexpected offer, an urgent photo shoot, same day, immediate availability required. She had time before her audition. She said yes. At precisely 10:45 in the morning, she called her mother. She told Elaine she had to rush off to a shoot and that she would call back later with news about the audition. She did not say where the shoot was. She did not say who she was meeting. She grabbed her makeup bag and her appointment book, got into her car, and drove to the agreed location. She never called back. By that evening, Elaine had begun to worry. Linda was not someone who went quiet. She called after auditions, she checked in throughout the day. Silence was not her pattern. Elaine mentioned her concern to Steve, who tried to reassure his mother. Linda was probably caught up in something, probably busy. She would call soon. But the next morning came, and there was still nothing. Elaine contacted Linda's housemates.
None of them had seen her. When it emerged that Linda had not even shown up to the audition she had been preparing for, the one she had been excited about, Elaine's worry became something else entirely. She reported her daughter missing to the police. Investigators began where they always begin, with the people closest to the victim. They spoke to the housemates. They visited the gym Linda used regularly. They checked the restaurants and shops she frequented. They interviewed ex-boyfriends and business associates and people from her professional circle. Everyone cooperated. Everyone had an alibi. No one had argued with her. No one had any reason to want to hurt her. There was no obvious motive, no visible trail, no clear direction in which to look. The search for Linda's appointment book turned up nothing. It was not in her room. It was not in any of the places it might reasonably have been. It had gone with her. A public awareness campaign launched almost immediately after the disappearance was reported. Linda's family and friends printed advertisements with her photograph and detailed information, offering a cash reward for any useful information.
The professional football team she had cheered for issued a press release. News of her disappearance moved through local media and then into national coverage. Several television programs devoted significant airtime to the story. The police hotline was receiving approximately 100 calls per hour at its peak. None of those calls produced a concrete lead. The case felt like it was standing still. And then the garbage collector saw the news. 4 days after Linda's disappearance, the man who had collected those photographs from the roadside dumpster was watching television when he saw her face on the screen. He recognized her immediately.
He contacted the police and gave them the exact location where he had found the images. The next morning, investigators returned to that area and conducted a thorough search. What they found changed the direction of the investigation entirely. More photographs, Linda's personal diary, and a rental agreement for a vehicle, a prototype sports utility vehicle that had not yet been released to the public, dated November 16th, the day she disappeared. The name on the rental agreement matched a contact saved in Linda's phone. That name was Charles Rathbone.
The search expanded outward from the original dump site. Volunteers joined the investigators, covering the surrounding area on foot. Approximately 4 hours into the expanded search, one of Linda's friends found her cosmetic bag in a second dumpster located roughly 10 kilometers from where the diary had been recovered. The items were being discarded in a deliberate pattern. Someone had moved through this area and disposed of evidence at intervals, either in a hurry or under the assumption that garbage collectors would make the evidence disappear before anyone thought to look. That same evening, while investigators were processing Linda's car, which had been found abandoned in the parking lot of a restaurant, reported by an anonymous caller, their phones rang again. This time, the caller was not anonymous. It was Charles Rathbone.
He said he had seen Linda on the day of her disappearance. He said they had met at a restaurant in the morning to discuss her portfolio. He said she had not been suitable for the shoot he had in mind and that they had parted ways in the parking lot. He said he had no idea how his name had ended up on a car rental agreement found among her belongings. He said he had no idea how her belongings had ended up in a dumpster. He had explanations for everything and answers for nothing. He was asked to come to the police station for further questioning. He said he would. Then he called back and said he could not make it. That same night, he placed a phone call to an acquaintance, a woman who happened to be a reserve officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. He was heavily intoxicated. He was saying incoherent things. Among those incoherent things, he said that he had something to do with Linda's disappearance. He said he had a gun. He said he intended to use it on himself.
The woman and a colleague drove immediately to his address. It took considerable time to convince him to come outside. When he finally appeared, he was visibly intoxicated, and he was holding a firearm. During the conversation on the steps of his home, the weapon discharged. The bullet struck the pavement and ricocheted, injuring the woman who had come to help him. The injury was not fatal, but it was enough. Officers placed Charles Rathbone under arrest. The search of his home produced a picture that no one in that investigation would forget quickly. More than one firearm, a bag containing rope, duct tape, and alcohol, and dozens of photographs, images of women, models, posed in positions that suggested they were dead. Not horror film aesthetics, not artistic ambiguity. Posed, deliberately and carefully posed to resemble death. Under questioning, Charles Rathbone abandoned his original account entirely and offered a new one. He now admitted that he had hired Linda for a photo shoot that day. He said the location was a dry lake bed outside the city, and that the shoot had involved Linda driving the prototype vehicle. He said that while demonstrating car stunts for her, he had lost control of the vehicle and accidentally struck her with the side mirror. He said when he got out and realized she was dead, he panicked. He said he buried her in the woods because he did not know what else to do. He said he was so traumatized by the experience that he could not remember exactly where he had put her. The investigators found the vehicle. It had been cleaned, thoroughly, more than once. Forensic examination of the exterior found no dents, no scratches, no damage to the bodywork consistent with an impact that could have killed a person. No traces of fabric, no hair on the outside of the car. But inside, between the seat gaps, technicians found reddish stains, several long, light-colored hairs, and a deep dent on the interior of one of the doors, the kind of dent consistent with a struggle, with a body being thrown against a surface from the inside. The story of an accidental side mirror strike was not holding together. Other models who had worked with Charles Rathbone came forward as the investigation progressed. Their accounts painted a consistent picture. He had a pattern of behavior that crossed professional lines, inappropriate remarks, pressure, conduct that made women uncomfortable enough that many refused to work with him unless they had no other option. The industry knew about it. It was not a secret. It was simply something that had been absorbed into the background noise of a world where women's discomfort was routinely treated as an acceptable cost of doing business. Two models confirmed something more specific. They had been present in a professional context when the subject of Linda came up, a conversation about potential bookings, about whether Linda might be right for a particular campaign.
Charles Rathbone had stated clearly and without hesitation that he would never work with her unless he was forced to. He had spoken about her with contempt. The models who heard it had been surprised by the intensity of his feeling. Rumors circulated in the industry suggesting that Linda had previously and firmly rejected his attempts to pursue her personally. That rejection, it seemed, had not sat easily with him. Then came the information about Ohio. In 1979, Charles Rathbone had stood trial for sexual assault. The judge had believed his account that the encounter was consensual. He had been acquitted. The woman who had accused him had not been believed, and Charles Rathbone had walked out of that courtroom and continued his career and his life as though it had never happened. DNA analysis confirmed what the physical evidence had already suggested. The hairs and bloodstains found inside the vehicle belonged to Linda Sobek. The forensic picture was now clear enough for investigators to move forward, but they needed to find her body. Without it, the case against Rathbone, while strong, had a gap that a skilled defense attorney could exploit. So they tried something different.
They told him they believed his story. They told him they thought it had been an accident, just as he said. They told him that finding Linda's body would actually help prove it, that physical evidence at the burial site could corroborate his account of an accidental impact.
They said it sympathetically. They said it as though they were on his side. His memory returned almost immediately. On November 25, 1995, 9 days after Linda's disappearance, Charles Rathbone directed investigators from a helicopter, pointing to a location in a remote area outside the city. A forensic anthropologist supervised the recovery operation. After 8 hours of careful excavation, Linda's body was found. What the cold and the altitude and the absence of direct sunlight had done was slow the decomposition process significantly. Her remains were in a state of preservation that the forensic team had not expected, and that preservation allowed the medical examiner to read her body with a clarity that became devastating to Rathbone's defense.
There were no injuries around Linda's knees. None. If she had been struck by a moving vehicle and thrown, the lower body would have shown characteristic impact injuries, fractures, abrasions, the specific damage pattern that a car strike produces. Her legs were clean of any such injuries. What they were not clean of was something else entirely. Marks on her ankles, consistent with being bound. The thickness of those marks matched the rope found in the bag at Rathbone's home. Internal bruising and hematomas on her legs indicated that she had been subjected to sustained physical violence. Her clothing had been rearranged after death. If she had been hastily buried after an accident, her clothing would reflect that, disordered, disturbed, consistent with someone moving a body in a panic. Instead, it appeared she had been dressed after she died. Her face showed no traces of makeup, despite the fact that she had been on her way to a professional photo shoot when she disappeared and would almost certainly have applied makeup before arriving. Her blood alcohol level was significantly elevated, inconsistent with Linda's known habits and consistent with alcohol having been administered to her without her full cooperation. The cause of death, as determined by the medical examiner, was asphyxiation. Linda Sobek had been deprived of oxygen. She had struggled violently before she died. The fight for her life had left marks throughout her body that told that story plainly and without ambiguity. Charles Rathbone was formally charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $1 million.
A memorial service was held for Linda at the church where she had grown up. More than 1,000 people attended. Family, friends, colleagues, and people who had never known her personally but who had followed her story and felt the weight of it. The media covered it extensively. Her family stood at the center of it and received the condolences of strangers and bore all of it with a dignity that must have cost them enormously. Linda's family had always been close. Her parents and her brother Steve had been the constants of her life. They had celebrated every milestone with her, had watched her build something real out of ambition and discipline and early morning auditions and long days on set. They had been proud of her in the specific and particular way that comes from watching someone you love become fully themselves. And now they were burying her. And they were doing it because a man she had trusted professionally had decided that her refusal of him was something that required a response. While awaiting trial, Rathbone attempted suicide. He was placed under strict surveillance. He continued to maintain his innocence and continued to construct new versions of events. In one of these versions, he claimed that Linda had initiated a romantic encounter during the shoot, that he had rebuffed her, that she had become angry.
That during the subsequent altercation over the car stunt, she had fallen and been injured, and that in attempting to restrain her afterward, he had inadvertently caused her to stop breathing. He had an explanation for the rope marks. He said he had tied her ankles to carry the body to the burial site. He produced 5 rolls of film that he claimed would support his account, images of a woman in the prototype vehicle.
When forensic experts examined the photographs, they found that 4 rolls showed a woman in dresses, and the 5th showed blurry images in suggestive poses taken over already exposed film that made location and identity difficult to confirm. Further analysis established that the vehicle in the photographs was not the same prototype listed in the rental agreement. The woman's build and clothing did not match Linda's. The photographs proved nothing, and the defense knew it. The trial began in October 1996. The prosecution laid out its case methodically: the evidence from the vehicle, the forensic findings from Linda's body, the rope, the photographs from Rathbone's home, the testimony of the models who had heard him speak about Linda with contempt, the 1979 Ohio case, the DNA, the bloodstains, the pattern of a man who had done this before and had been allowed to continue.
The prosecution's argument was straightforward. Charles Rathbone had planned from the beginning to take Linda to a remote location. He had offered her alcohol. When she refused his advances, he had responded with violence. And when she was dead, he had buried her in the woods and returned to his life and his career and waited to see whether anyone would figure it out. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On November 2, 1996, they returned a verdict of guilty on both counts, sexual assault and first-degree murder. The following day, Charles Rathbone was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the jurors filed out of the courtroom, Linda's mother, Elaine, her father, Robert, and her brother, Steve, embraced each of them. They thanked them individually. That is what justice looked like for this family. Standing at the door of a courtroom and holding the hands of 12 strangers who had listened carefully and believed what they heard. The case did not end there. Years passed. The name Linda Sobek receded from the headlines in the way that names eventually do. Charles Rathbone was in prison. The verdict had been delivered. The family was left to find a way to live inside the loss. Then, in 2010, a private investigator working on an unrelated disappearance began to notice something. The case he was investigating had elements that reminded him of something he had read about. He began pulling old files. He began cross-referencing names and locations and professional connections, and what he found, slowly and then all at once, was a pattern.
Throughout California and beyond, stretching back through the 1980s and into the 1990s, there were cases of missing young women, models, women who worked in front of cameras, who moved through an industry built on image and access and the routine exchange of trust for opportunity. Many of them had worked with the same agent. Many of them had intersected professionally with the same small network of photographers, and many of them had simply disappeared, their cases filed away as unresolved, their families left waiting for answers that had never come. When this information was presented to the authorities and eventually reached Charles Rathbone in his prison cell, he did something no one expected. He admitted it. Reluctantly, partially, in the careful language of a man who had spent years constructing defenses, he acknowledged that Linda Sobek had not been his first victim. He acknowledged that he had operated within a network of other men for many years. He did not claim responsibility for the other deaths directly, but he confirmed that they had happened and that he had known about them, and that the world of professional modeling had provided the infrastructure that made all of it possible. The families, who had been waiting for years, finally had something. Not everything. Not full closure, because full closure in cases like these is something that exists only in the language of press releases and is never quite real for the people who are actually living inside the grief. But something, an answer.
A confirmation that their daughters had not simply vanished, that they had not been forgotten, that someone had finally looked long enough and hard enough to find the shape of what had been done to them. Linda Sobek's family has spoken publicly about her many times in the years since her death. Her mother has said that the world was a better place when Linda was in it. Her brother Steve has said that the absence she left is not something that diminishes over time. It is something you learn to carry differently, but it does not get lighter. Her father Robert stood in a courtroom and watched 12 strangers deliver justice for his daughter and then embraced each of them on the way out. What the family has also said in interviews and in public statements across the years is this: that if the judge in Ohio in 1979 had believed the woman who accused Charles Rathbone of assault, he would have gone to prison. He would not have been free to continue. He would not have been free to build a career in an industry that gave him access to young women who trusted him because his name carried professional credibility. He would not have been free to make a phone call to Linda Sobek on a November morning and offer her a last-minute booking that she accepted because she was ambitious and disciplined and took her work seriously and had no reason to believe the offer was anything other than what it appeared to be.
She walked into that photo shoot and became the evidence that finally exposed what had been happening in the dark for more than a decade. Her death was not random. It was not an accident. It was the latest in a long line of deliberate acts carried out by men who had learned that the structures around them would protect their access and disbelieve their victims, and move on. Her name was Linda Sobek. She was 27 years old. She loved her family. She called her mother after auditions. She had a plan, and she was working it, and she was good at what she did, and she deserved to see where it was going to take her. She never got to find out. But the truth about what happened to her and to the others is no longer buried in a wooded area outside the city. It is on the record, and that is because someone looked carefully enough and long enough to find it. That is what she deserved. That, at the very least, is what she got.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.
She was not looking for anything when she found it. That is the part that stays with you when you sit with this story long enough. There was no investigation, no suspicion, no slow accumulating dread that had been building toward a moment of revelation. She was cleaning a house. She was doing what she had done dozens of times before, moving through familiar rooms, dusting familiar surfaces, performing the ordinary domestic labor that had defined so much of her relationship with the man who lived there. She bumped a computer mouse with her elbow. The screen woke up, and in the space of a single second, on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon, the entire architecture of her life cracked open at the foundation. What she saw on that screen would set in motion a chain of events that ended with a man dead, a woman in handcuffs, and a courtroom full of people trying to understand how a story that began with something as quiet as a dust cloth and an elbow could arrive at something as permanent as murder. Her name was Jade Jensen, and this is her story, all of it, from the beginning, without looking away.
Jade Jensen grew up between two worlds, and she never fully belonged to either of them. The first world was defined by her biological father, a steady, reliable man who had raised her with consistency and love from the time she was very small. He was the fixed point of her childhood, the one person whose presence she could always count on, whose support never came with conditions attached. She loved him without complication, which is a rare thing, and she knew it even as a child. The second world was her mother's, and it was considerably less stable. Her mother struggled with addiction and with mental health difficulties that made sustained parenting difficult and sometimes impossible. The attention that Jade needed and deserved was not reliably available. Contact with her mother was irregular, sometimes warm and sometimes absent, governed by forces that had nothing to do with Jade and everything to do with a woman fighting battles that she frequently lost.
When Jade was 14, her mother met a man named Thomas Moran. He was older, established, with a stable income and a reputation in his community for reliability and hard work. He had 3 biological sons of his own. He seemed, to everyone who observed the relationship from the outside, like exactly the kind of anchor that Jade's mother needed. When Thomas and her mother had a son together, a boy they named Cole, something shifted for Jade. She adored that baby. She wanted to be near him, to be part of his life, to be the kind of presence for him that had not always been consistently present for her. Initially, her relationship with Thomas was formal and without particular warmth. He was her mother's partner, nothing more. But over time, through the ordinary accumulation of shared meals and shared problems and shared effort, something developed between them, a bond. Thomas began referring to Jade as his daughter. He said it to other people, in public, without hesitation. She was not his biological child, and he did not pretend otherwise, but he claimed her in the way that matters most, which is simply by doing it consistently over time. Then came the crisis that changed everything. Cole's first day of school arrived, and Jade's mother did not make it. A breakdown, an absence at exactly the moment that a small child needed his parent to show up.
Please, watch out on my next video.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.